Welcome to the Film Analysis. Today with Apocalypse Now by Francis Ford Coppola, an absolute masterpiece we can always refer to. The film, adapted from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, is set in the Vietnam War. Captain Willard is supposed to kill Colonel Kurtz, who is said to have lost his mind and rules a tribe in no man's land like God and the devil at the same time. The river journey to Kurtz becomes, for Willard and his men, a journey into their own hearts of darkness. It's a journey through time that begins in the present, then continues with a stopover in the 19th century when they are with the French colonizers, opening a historical panorama that can clearly be located in the 19th century, although they also have the historical overview. We are situated in Old Europe and we move on to a mythical time, the time of Kurtz. The film is so destructive because it abandons any teleology, despite its linearity in narration. Apocalypse Now is set in the Vietnam War, but it is only incidentally about it. The heart of the darkness is not Vietnam, but our own Western culture and civilizational project failing grandly. This failure produces an aesthetic of horror the film profits from. It concerns the downfall of American civilization. This is portrayed in two ways. First, we have two narrators. Willard, who narrates his point of view, and then there is Kurtz's narration. Insofar as Willard always has possession of these protocols, the documents he received about Kurtz, and he always passes them on to us. Two narrators and two paths emerge. One way is that the civilizational project develops into a barbaric one, as we see in the helicopter scene, but also when Willard shoots an innocent woman and commits other atrocities. And the other way, that is just the river culminating in the archaic violence of Kurtz. It is not Vietnam that Americans are bombing back to the Stone Age, but themselves. Thinking in terms of difference is rather unpopular today, but it is precisely this difference that slowly dissolves in the river trip. Willard and Lance in particular blur these boundaries, a post-colonial discourse. The French colonizers represent this very discourse. They embody the old way of thinking in the old Europe, including all racisms. But the post-colonial shift in boundaries that occurs afterwards with Willard and the others, and which succeeds completely with Kurtz, can be much more dangerous, as this film shows us. We tend to talk positively about hybrid identities today. There is a real hype about the figure of the third party. Think of cultural theorists like Homi K. Bhabha. It is the idea that the world could be better when we get rid of binary thinking. But isn't Kurtz precisely such a figure of the third? We are witnessing the dissolution of orders, opposites and boundaries. Evil emerges precisely in this regard, being ahistorical. If Kurtz were not so tremendously brutal, he would probably be the hero of post-colonial studies. For a long time in the film, we see the bodies of white and black Americans. Little by little, the black people are killed. Now only white people are left. But they are soon no longer white. We last see this whiteness in the French colonial masters, who are all dressed in linen suits, in beautiful clothes. But soon Lance begins to paint himself. Once he arrives at Kurtz and his indigenous people, the whiteness dissolves completely. The excessive use of light and shadow, especially with Kurtz and Willard, shows not only how they become brothers in spirit, but also how fragile their identity is. Kurtz will paint his face as Lance did before. Willard, too, will leave with his face painted. Willard will not only resemble Kurtz and already be revered as his successor. Martin Sheen will also play like Marlon Brando. Hybrid identities by no means celebrated, however, as cultural scholars like to do today. Apocalypse Now illustrates the evil that can be unleashed by any blurring of boundaries. At the end, the film works with dissolution. The cult side on the right, the boat and helicopter on the left, and we see Willard transformed into Kurtz. We see the cruel indifference of the last 3 hours in a single frame. The film is also about the end of a Christian worldview with its aesthetics and its mission. It is the return of the pagan. We see an archaic cult of sacrifice in 3 ways. Willard sacrifices Kurtz, and in parallel montage we see the sacrifice of an ox by this tribe. And Vietnam is sacrificed to constitute Western civilization. Kurtz may have lost his mind, but in the West, sanity has turned to unreason. In his theory of sacrifice, René Girard has repeatedly shown how communities need the sacrifice to then be able to produce and constitute themselves. Kurtz is thus also the sinister brother of Lawrence of Arabia, who dissolves his European identity and finally can no longer answer the question, "Who are you?" We no longer find the elegantly iridescent hybridity of Lawrence in Kurtz. Kurtz has entangled himself in an indefinable idiosyncratic myth, governing only through destruction. Destruction of others and, in the end, of his own self. Kurtz as the blind spot that is violence itself, whose ultimate justification remains dark. This is probably why violence and evil fascinate. Even in bright light, violence can be brutal. We see this too in Apocalypse Now, when Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore appears, who wants to force Lance and other soldiers to serve, who mimes the sunny boy and kills bestially at the same time. He is just another Sunny Kurtz. Even the long version doesn't change the fact that he then takes on an injured child and has him flown to the military hospital. It only increases the contradiction. In Kurtz's case, it is the pagan, seemingly indigenous nature cult legitimizing his violence. In Kilgore's case, it is the surfing culture and the tourism associated with it that drives him. In a cruel way, you turn the whole world into a travel catalogue and call it civilization. Coppola's clairvoyance is evident here astonishingly. Everyone knows the film, and yet it has changed so little of the way we look at things. Even today, we still consider surfer culture and rock and roll by The Doors and Rolling Stones, comic culture and psychedelic drugs to be subversive. Yet the film proves just the opposite. It is precisely the counterculture that is perfect for making war a real experience. I can't get no satisfaction. Isn't that Kurtz's motto too? And this anti-rationalism, founded in drug consumption, aren't we very quickly getting to Kurtz there too? Lance thinks this is a much better Disneyland. Willard and Kurtz also find themselves alternatively like the hippies and all the other dropouts. High culture, represented by Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries, in the famous helicopter scene long ago orchestrated the wars. Coppola uses it here ironically. After all, no one believes in a Valhalla to which the Valkyries take the heroes anymore. But the scene underlines director Coppola proves to be a brilliant conductor with verve, a feeling for dynamics, editing and effects. No matter how disastrous the filming may have been and how psychedelic it may have seemed, Coppola, unlike his characters, does not dissolve. He does not lose his bearings. From the first scene to the last, he confidently maintains an overview. Every image is right, the formal and textual rigor impress. Is Coppola like Kurtz? Yes, perhaps in terms of radicalism, but not in terms of spin. May all the characters lose their aplomb, just as the Vietnam War itself went disastrously off the rails. Coppola, the artist, is the sovereign establishing a poetic philosophical order in a state of emergency. Apocalypse Now is not a psychedelic film. It is a film about intoxication, and it's a film about the media representation of war. The French theorist Paul Virilio put war and cinema together. The camera lens and the rifle scope focus in the same way. You shoot a photo or you shoot a person. The helicopter scene imitates the camera, sometimes the aiming. The media are also present in other ways. Even the evil, like Kurtz, is initially mediated by the film through a tape recording of his voice, which draws you in. Coppola himself makes a cameo appearance. He can be seen as a war correspondent, filming the military operation. The war appears as a media spectacle, but it is precisely through the presence of the camera that it is experienced more intensely. The presence of the camera not only witnesses, it intensifies. When you have seen something incredible, a natural disaster or a great sunset, you say, that was just like in the film. What does that mean? So here reality becomes fictional. Fiction is the exaggerated reality. Why do people photograph terrible or great events? You could say they can't stand it and they need to distance themselves from it. And that's why they put a lens in front of their eyes. But you could also say, no, it's precisely by looking through the lens that they intensify their experience. For example, the view from a window can be much more intense than when you are simply standing outside your house, directly in nature. This also applies to sex. Should one prefer the Redux version of Apocalypse Now? Absolutely, because one scene is highly interesting. The playmates come back in the longer version. They are supposed to have sex with Willard and his crew. Then something strange happens. We know the motive from Hitchcock's Vertigo. These playmates don't look like they do in Playboy, but are a bit deranged, don't have their wigs on, and before the men can sleep with the women, they first reconstruct them as known from the Playboy photos. Only when the illusion is perfect again are the women attractive to them. The image conveyed by the media is stronger than mundane reality. Coppola was right when he stated, "My film is not about Vietnam, it is Vietnam." But not because it's also incredibly authentic and because the filming was such a tremendous ordeal, but because fiction is more real than reality. Film is a school of seeing, not reality. In reality, we watch but don't see. It would be nice if you would like to support the film analysis financially. You can do so via my bank account or PayPal. Also, you can find me on Patreon. Thank you very much.